Well, there's been no bigger debacle in recent memory than this Jackson County assessment issue that, by the way, the deadline to appeal your assessment is coming up on Monday. It's the end of the month, July 31st. We now say hello and good morning to our friend David Stokes with the Show Me Institute, Missouri-based think tank, joining us on KCMO Talk Radio. The folks are hurting here in Jackson County. You know it well, David. From a policy perspective statewide, what should Governor Parson and the legislature, they've done a couple of things, but what should they be looking at doing right now?
Well, the one thing that they've done is to authorize counties the right to freeze seniors' property taxes. And while that's certainly being greeted warmly by many senior citizens and politicians as well, I don't think it's a good idea. I think they need to revisit that. What they really need to do this year, what people throughout the state need this year is for taxing bodies, school districts and counties and cities, et cetera, to actually roll back their rates more than even they may be required to. And they'll be setting these rates here in the next month or two. And people need to get on their school boards, get on their county commissions, get on whoever, and make them roll back those rates so that people aren't whacked with enormous assessment increases. And then finally, in Kansas City...
go ahead, David.
In Kansas City, we need to get rid in Kansas City of the exemption for the school district. That means they don't have to roll their rates back at all. That's what's really hurting people in much of Kansas City.
So when you look at the senior citizen thing, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of senior citizens who are like, great, it's going to cap my property taxes, keep me in my home. What's the downside to that then for those under the age of 65 who would not qualify for this? And why do you think overall this is bad economic policy?
It's bad policy because it's going to reduce our tax base. And when it reduces that tax base over time, it's going to transfer more of the burden to everybody else. We should, as much as they're calling this a tax freeze for seniors, it could be properly called a tax increase on everybody else. We'd love it if local governments were able to. We all want local government to live within their means and make cuts where appropriate. I certainly want that. But the fact is that there's no evidence from other states that have done this that suddenly local governments are going to start being more disciplined in their taxing and spending. And what's going to happen is that burden, a portion of it, perhaps a substantial burden, is going to be transferred on to everybody else. Anytime you reduce your tax base, whether it be a TIF for a developer or a tax abatement for another developer or a property tax freeze for a large segment of the population, it's harmful and it raises taxes on everyone else.
Is there a state that, like even Texas, I've heard, while it's a tax-friendly state, David Stokes, has pretty high property taxes. They have no state income tax, but the property taxes are pretty high. California, on the other hand, is not a tax-friendly state, but they've actually gone through capping property taxes over the last 40 years, and many will blame the high home prices on the tax or on the cap on property taxes. Is there a state that you look at, a legislature that you look at, that has got this issue down pat and done a very good job on trying to play this whole balancing act as well as possible?
That's a great question, Pete, and I wish I had a better answer for you. The problem is that property taxes, unlike income and sales taxes, which are generally conducted the same from state to state, there's a lot of difference in how property taxes are conducted state to state. So other than Missouri, I wish I was more of an expert in how every state does it. But California is a great example of what you just said, because, yes, they capped property tax increases. So longtime homeowners in California certainly benefit from those property tax limits, that your home cannot increase in value from year to year. But what they've done over the past 40 years is they've increased alternate taxes substantially. I mean, as you said, California is a very high tax state. And they've instituted new property taxes so that new homeowners pay substantially higher property taxes than old homeowners. And it's not really age-related in California. It's just more how long ago you bought your home. So it's dramatically unfair in a lot of ways, and it certainly hasn't kept taxes low in California. And what you have in states that perhaps enact these overly tight limits on property taxes is that you have high taxes that are more harmful to growth, especially income taxes, and you restrict the taxes that, while people hate them, and I know people hate property taxes, but they don't harm economic growth like income taxes do. And that's why, to a degree, we should be focused on using them more than we're using income and earnings taxes. But that's not what the voters like, as we've seen around the country and in Missouri.
Mm-hmm. So, David, Frank White, of course, the executive of the county, called last week for the immediate implementation and improvement of this bill that we were just talking about earlier, which allows counties to enact a provision that freezes property taxes for seniors 65 years and older. It feels like a massive Band-Aid. I mean, Frank White is, I would argue, the least popular person right now in the entire Kansas City region. Is this Frank White just trying to get a short-term bailout for himself and his political allies here? Do you think he should completely scrap this assessment process and start from scratch based on some of the horrible stories that have come out here over the last few weeks? I mean, what's realistic on this front if you're Frank White?
Well, what's unfortunately not realistic, I don't think, is completely scrapping the whole process. And the Show Me Institute, my colleague Patrick Ishmael has some blog posts up about Jackson County assessment and the Royals and other issues, tying them together at showmeinstitute.org. And yes, look, structurally and administratively, the process has been a disaster. We know that the City of Independence is suing Jackson County because they did not meet certain required deadlines in giving people notice on their assessment increases. There's just structural and administrative problems with the assessment top to bottom. And yes, it's a good thing that they extended their appeal deadline to the end of this month. That was good. It's certainly not enough to address the desires and anger of the taxpayers. But can they just scrap it all? I don't think there's any provision in law that allows them to do that. I could be wrong, but you're not just dealing with Jackson County's money, and that's the issue with these bills that allow counties to set these senior tax freezes and the like. You're dealing with school district money and city money and fire district money and everybody else's money. And the problem with Jackson County just starting over from scratch is they're not just impacting their own taxes. They deserve any problem they get with their terrible assessment management, but they're affecting a lot of other taxing districts at the same time. And that's the problem here.
It is. David Stokes with the Show Me Institute. Always good to have him on KCMO. David, thanks for your attention on this issue here in Jackson County. It's important to hundreds of thousands of people in our region. We appreciate you joining us. Thanks so much.
Always enjoy talking about it. And just one last time, it's time to get rid of the Kansas City School District exemption. That's what's really whacking people with huge property tax increases in much of Kansas City, and that's got to go.
And, David, would that be done at the state level, or is that a local thing?
No, that has to be done constitutionally. It's, interestingly enough, as sort of I understand it to be a relic of the desegregation cases of years ago. That's a state constitutional provision that exempts the Kansas City School District from rolling back rates as assessments increase, and we have to change it statewide. But the people of Kansas City really need that.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point, and start rattling some cages down there in Jeff City on that one, David. Thanks so much, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate it.